Hi there, this is Jennifer, and I am very thankful that you've stopped by. Now, if you ask me, I think the most important part of a card is this sentiment. And I really like to add sentiment strips onto my cards, either as the focal sentiment or kind of a sub-sentiment, or even on the inside of a card. Well, sentiments come in different sizes, so it's sometimes hard to cut it to a nice strip that you can easily add to your card, and you don't want to have a bunch of dies to cut different sizes of sentiment strips. So I have a hack for you today. I encourage you to watch it all because I have ways of doing this if you do have dies, if you don't have dies, if you do have a stamping tool, if you don't have a stamping tool. And once you set up your templates, you can use them over and over with different stamp sets. I will be demonstrating this technique with this Altenew Bold Sentiment stamp set. I really like the sentiments in here and that they're reverse. You can cut it tight up against the edge or leave a little space around it. Lots of ways to use it. You'll see me use this throughout the video. Now we're going to be making a template, which will allow us to stamp and cut out those sentiments very quickly, or any sentiments in fact. Now to make my template, I'm choosing to run my cardstock through a laminator first. This will just make my template, which I'll cut from this, a little bit stronger and something I can use over and over again. You can definitely make your template out of regular cardstock and skip the laminating. However, a laminator is a great tool to have for organizing. In fact, this is the same way I create my dividers for my stamps and dies in my organization. I just take a colored piece of cardstock, put it into a laminating pouch, which is that clear folded piece, and then run it through a heat laminator. This creates a nice durable protected piece that'll hold up over time. You can use pretty much any trimmer to cut this down. I'm just cutting the edges off so it looks like a slick piece of heavyweight cardstock. Now I use my Tim Holtz trimmer, but again, try whatever trimmer you have. Next, I'm cutting this down into 1-inch strips. We're going to use these 1-inch strips to build a template so that whenever we need a sentiment strip, we can use the template and a stamp and we're ready to go. I'm also cutting most of these to be 3.5 inches long. So these pieces are 3.5 by 1 inch. Again, this is cardstock that's laminated, so it's strong, but you could just use regular cardstock if you want. And you could do different sizes if you want, but I thought this was a good manageable size for the template that we're making. So this template will help us to stamp centered on a thin strip of cardstock to create a sentiment strip. Now, any size strip would work. I'm choosing to demonstrate today with 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 3/8 of an inch. I find those to be the sizes I use the most. Now I know measuring isn't fun for everyone, but don't worry, our trimmers have markings which make it easier. For example, on this Tim Holtz trimmer that I use the most, those grid lines in the background are 1/4 of an inch apart. So if you just move that left edge of your cardstock 1 grid line over and cut, you will get a 1/4 inch sentiment strip. So just 1 grid line over and cut, and you get a 1/4 of an inch strip. That's great for small sentiments. So you could just keep cutting, moving the paper over 1 grid at a time and make a bunch at once. If you want to do a 1/2 inch, you move the paper over 2 grid lines. This will give you a wider strip, you can see, for bigger sentiments. If you want to do 3/8 of an inch, which I happen to use probably the most, you move that left edge of your cardstock over 1.5 grid lines. So you can see how that left edge is halfway through the grid lines, and you cut that. It doesn't have to be perfect. And that is 3/8 of an inch. Now, most trimmers do have the little ruler on the bottom you can follow for the markings, or if you're looking for a ruler that really marks all of the little increments, such as 3/8 of an inch, this Victor ruler is great. But again, your trimmer should have the markings so that you can easily cut a bunch of strips. I like to cut a bunch in these 3 sizes and have them sitting aside, ready to go whenever I need a sentiment strip. We will make a template for each of these sizes. Bear with me, it's really easy. You may also have dies on hand that cut strips like this. Many companies have dies that cut strips. You could definitely use that if you want. I will demonstrate how to create a template with dies later on, so stick with me. So let's create a template. I'm using the corner of my MISTI stamping tool just to get the corner right. You don't need to use this. You can do it without, but I'm taking these 2 3.5 by 1 inch template pieces that I created earlier and putting them right up against each other in the corner. I then am taking some tape and taping those together. I'm using clear packing tape because it's strong. I will use this template again and again. I've created one of these in the past and I use it quite often, but I wanted to demonstrate it with you in this video, so I'm making another. So I put the tape down to put those together right there at a right angle. Just have those two pieces meeting in the corner. Now, next I'm putting a piece of tape on the other side too, again, just to make sure it stays put. You could use Scotch tape here if you prefer. So now we're taking one of our sentiment strips. This is the 1/2 inch strip that we cut earlier, and I'm putting it right into that little corner, right into the nook. This could be whatever size sentiment strip you want to make. I'll show you the others in a moment. Now we're taking another one of our pieces that was laminated and putting it right above it and taping that in place there. So basically I'm taping these laminated pieces right around our sentiment strip. So there will be a gap there that is the size of a sentiment strip. This one is 1/2 inch. And whenever I want to stamp on a 1/2 inch piece of cardstock and have a sentiment be centered on it nicely, I can use this template. I also write on the template what size sentiment strip so I can easily grab it next time I go to craft. Now I'll do the same process with the other two sizes of sentiment strips. So I'll do this with the 1/4 inch and with the 3/8 of an inch. So that little gap in the template will be the same size as these strips. So if you're going to do this, what I recommend doing is cutting a bunch of strips and keeping them in a little container on your desk. So whenever you want a sentiment strip, you grab that along with the template and you can get to stamping. I find creating templates like this very helpful because it saves time in the long run and it saves from getting frustrated when I do my stamping. Now, you may not need a template like this. You may be fine doing it as you go, which is totally okay. But I get a lot of questions about how to get your sentiment strips just right, the stamping centered nicely, and how to do it in an easy way. So I really wanted to share this in a video. So now I have 3 templates, one for a 1/4 inch sentiment strip, one for a 1/2 inch, and one for 3/8 of an inch. I like to punch a little circle in the top of the templates so I can hang them on a hook inside one of my cabinet doors. I will now demonstrate many ways you can use these templates in hopes that you can pick one that might work best for you. I'll do some with a stamping tool, some without. I will do some with a trimmer and some with scissors. There are lots of ways to do this. I'll even show you how to do this if you do have strip dies. I will then do some cards, and as we make some cards, I will show you my favorite way to use the templates. I will be focusing on using that bold sentiment stamp set from Altenew, but do know you can use these templates with any sentiments you have, and I'll give some examples later. The first few ways to use these templates is with a stamping tool. I'm putting down one of my sentiments. It doesn't have to be straight. You're just going to stamp it onto a piece of scrap cardstock. Now we'll take one of our templates and center it around the sentiment. So you'll just peek through the hole in the template and make sure that the sentiment is centered there. When you're happy with the position, you can hold it there with a magnet or a piece of tape. Now I'll take a sentiment strip of the same size as this template and pop it in place. And now we can stamp onto that strip, and look at this. It'll be positioned just right. And you can quickly stamp a bunch of sentiments onto pre-cut strips. Now to cut the other side, I just put it up against the corner of my trimmer and cut, and look at that. It's centered wonderfully. I'll demonstrate that method again, but this time on a smaller piece of cardstock. I'm putting a little bit of temporary tape on the back of that cardstock so that it'll stay in place in my MISTI. And I'll do the same process I just showed you. Now the nice thing about setting up these templates and having some cardstock strips already cut is anytime you want to stamp a sentiment onto a cardstock strip, you just grab these pieces and you can quickly follow this process. This is a time saver if you make a lot of sentiment strips. You can also make a bunch at once that you can keep it pre-stamped and ready to add on any card. And remember, although I'm demonstrating today with this one stamp set, you can use a lot of different sentiments with these same templates and strip sizes. So it works with whatever you have. Another way to do this that's similar is to use a sticky mat inside of your stamping tool. There's the MISTI sticky mat or the Brutus Monroe sticky mat, which I'm using here. That will just hold your cardstock and your template in place, which makes it super fast. Now here I have some 3/8 inch white cardstock strips that I cut, and I cut them to be shorter so that they'll fit into the stamping tool. Once again, I'll place the template around it, and look at that, the sticky mat holds the template in place too, and the strip we put inside. Here I have a longer strip than I need, so I'm going to rotate it and stamp the sentiment twice, so I'll have 2 for 1. Just trim that down and we'll have extra sentiments. Now this is the way that I find best to do this, where you stamp your sentiment, place the template around it, and then the strips inside of the template. Another way you can do this is to put your template over blank cardstock and then line up your stamp inside of the opening of the template. This is an Altenew sentiment strip stamp set. There are 3 different versions. I use them a lot in videos. Here I wanted to demonstrate with the 1/4 inch. I thought that fit this nicely. This time I lined up the sentiment inside of that opening on the template, and I'll stamp it to make sure I like the position. Then we can stamp this onto a bunch of 1/4 inch cardstock strips. I find it easier to line up the template around a stamped image, like I showed you before, but some people might find this easier, to line up the stamp inside of the opening. You can try both and go with whatever works for you. Now, if you don't want to use a stamping tool, you can still use the template. So I have stamped this sentiment randomly on a piece of cardstock. You can use an acrylic block. And I'm taking one of the templates and placing it around the sentiment, as we've done many times. This time I decided to use the 1/2 inch, so I have a larger amount of white trim around the outside edge. It looks great this way too. I'm taping the template in place, and then I'm tracing inside of the template with a pencil. Something light that you can erase is perfect. Now you can cut closer to the edge, doesn't have to be straight, but closer to the edge of the sentiment. This will allow us to be able to see our pencil lines and cut right along it. So I'll zoom in here, and you can see how that pencil line on the right, I'm lining up with the cutting edge of my trimmer. Once I have that lined up there, I can go ahead and cut, and then move it over, and I can cut again on the other pencil line. So now we have the top and the bottom of our sentiment strip, and we can cut the ends to match. So this is a great way to do this if you don't have a stamping tool or prefer not to use one. If you don't have a trimmer that's easy to see where you're cutting, you can do the same technique but use long scissors to cut along the pencil line. I really like these Tim Holtz scissors. It's great for creating a straight line, and you can cut your sentiment strips by hand. Now really the easiest way to create a stamped sentiment strip is to have sentiment strip dies. I think they're very helpful if you make a lot, but I know that we want to save on the supplies that we purchase, so I wanted to show you first the way to create your own sentiment strips, and now I'll show you how to use a template with sentiment strip dies. I would encourage you to look through your stamp sets that you may have coordinating dies for. Some of them do include sentiment strip dies, so you can use whatever you have. I'm going to demonstrate with an Altenew Featured Sentiments die set. This is a great die set because it cuts different size sentiment strips and it rounds the corners. You don't have to use the rounded corner if you want. You could cut it off, but I thought this would be a good set to demonstrate with. I'll start by cutting a bunch of sentiment strips with the dies, and I'll have these ready to go anytime I craft. I will also use the 2 longest sentiment strip dies to cut from a piece of laminated cardstock so I can create a template. You don't have to use laminated cardstock if you don't want to. Regular cardstock will work. You can also create a template for all the different sizes. I just went for the 2 longest, and you'll see how I use it. So we'll do the same process as before. Put some scrap cardstock down and stamp our sentiment onto it. Put the template around it. I could use either size. You can see one's a little wider than the other. I'm going to go for the more narrow one. I'll place the template around it, stick it to that sticky mat, and now I have a bunch of sentiment strips of different sizes over there that I can pop in place. I'm not using the rounded edges today, so it doesn't really matter where I stamp it on here. I'm just trying to center it between the top and the bottom using the template. Once I stamp a bunch of these, I can cut the ends off. Again, you could make a bigger template with openings for all the different dies in your sentiment strip die set, so you're ready to go at any time. Totally up to you. Now I'm just trimming the edges of these off, and look at these are all the same size, centered with the sentiment perfectly. Such a great way to make sure you get the results that you really want to have. The nice thing is I have templates now that I can use with a lot of sentiments, such as this one from Altenew, the flower vine stamp set that I use a lot in videos. This one fits great on the 1/4" sentiment strip, so I have a template ready to go for it. If you also like to create tiny sentiments to add anywhere on a card, this is another good option. This is the Tiny Sentiments Hello set. It's a small set, so it's got a great price point. So that would work with the 1/4" also. Now this one's the Altenew You Are Everything stamps, and you can see there are different size sentiments here. So we have the 1/2", 1/4", and 3/8 of an inch template made, and those will all work with the different sentiments in here. So if you get the basic size template and strips cut, you could use this with whatever sentiments you may have. One more tip about creating sentiment strips. If you struggle with making them with your trimmer, which I've heard people say they do, there are many die sets out there that will cut strips of different widths. And then you can use them with whatever stamps you have. Now this is from Simon Says Stamp. This one cuts lots of different widths, a lot of the basic sizes. So this is a good example of how to cut your own sentiment strips if you don't want to use a trimmer. At the end of this video, I will link to a video I did showing how to use this die set in particular to create sentiment strips. All right, now it's time to make several cards of different styles, and I have tips for adding these sentiments onto your cards in different ways. All right, for the first card, I'll be using this new Altenew Sentiments Floral set. There is a stamp set, coordinating dies, and coordinating stencils that are sold separately or together. I really like the option of being able to do the coloring with stencils because that's what I enjoy doing the most. But this is a great one for coloring if you prefer that. I'm starting by stamping this wreath with Altenew Obsidian Black Pigment ink. I love this ink. It stamps really dark, it stamps very nicely, and if you want to, you can add clear embossing powder to it for an embossed look. This ink is finally back in stock and I'm so happy about it. I used it for all of my sentiment strips in this video too. So after heat setting this, I'll use the coordinating die to cut it out. I like to do my die cutting first because I don't want to do all the coloring and then mess up the die cutting. Now I can stick this wreath onto my Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat. That will hold the wreath in place and it'll hold my stencil in place once I line it up. These stencils are very easy to use because engraved on the stencil are the steps for doing the inking, and there is a guide with it that shows you how to do it. So there's very little thought involved. I want to use multiple colors of ink, so I'm using my detailed blending brush from Altenew, so I can get into the tiny spaces with different colors. I'm going to go through the inking process pretty quickly because I want to keep the focus of this video on the sentiment strips, but these are very easy to line up. There are layers so you can build up the color. I really like doing my inking on the sticky mat because it holds everything in place and you can just pull it off and move it to the next step when you're ready to. I do want to say, I use a lot of different tools to make my crafting easier. I craft quite a bit, and I like to share the tools I find helpful because they may be helpful to you. But it doesn't mean that you need to have them all to create. You can use what you have, and if maybe you see a tool that you really think would be helpful to you, then you can try that tool. Don't feel like you need all the tools to be able to create like you see people in videos. We just share what we find helpful in case it's helpful to you. So this sticky mat is a good example. It helped with holding the stencils and die cut in place. When I'm done, I can pull the die cut off and look at that. I love that quick coloring. I like that this wreath is kind of an oval, so it fits nicely in the center of a card, but you could put it offset or put a diagonal, whatever you want. Now let's do that background. You can see that white background has some embossing to it. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine, and I have some regular heavyweight white cardstock. I like to rub a little baby wipe on the front or in back of my cardstock before using an embossing folder. That helps to keep the paper from cracking and also gives a deeper impression. You could also spray with water, but I sometimes get too much water that way. I put it into this Altenew Starburst 3D embossing folder and ran it through my die cut machine. You could use whatever die cut machine you have. Just follow the instructions in the manual for using an embossing folder. And look at that beautiful pattern. This is now one of my new favorite embossing folders, and I'll use it several times in this video. I trimmed that panel down and then added it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch black note card. I thought it'd be fun to have several sentiments right in the center of our wreath. Now, I'm using the sentiments I created before, and I want some dimension behind them. Whenever you add dimension behind a thin sentiment strip like this, I do recommend using cardstock scraps to add that dimension. If you use little pieces of foam tape behind one layer of small cardstock, it'll probably get crushed in the mail. So instead of foam squares, I am using scraps of cardstock and putting 2 or 3 behind each sentiment. I keep those scraps on hand. You could even use packaging for that if you wanted to. If you don't want to add dimension, you could glue straight down onto the card too. You'll notice that these pieces I'm putting on the back of our sentiments are different sizes. Some of them have stamping on it because I had messed up. Doesn't matter. You're just putting some strength behind it. All right, now we want to get these kind of positioned straight and centered and evenly spaced in the front of our card. I once again am using a sticky mat for that. This is the Misty sticky mat that I've cut down to be 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Multiple sticky mats come in that pack, so you can cut one of them down and still have whole ones if you want. Now, I can use the grid line on this to get my sentiments spaced evenly and straight and centered. And the sticky mat will hold them in place. Because the mat is clear, I can pick this up and do it on top of my card if I want to, but it was easier for you to see if I did it on my desk. Once I have my sentiments positioned how I want them, I'll take a piece of tape and place it over the sentiments and pick them all up together. This is Altenew satin tape, which really works well for this. Now we need to put adhesive on the back of these. Notice that my wreath has some dimension to it on my card. So the center of these sentiments won't actually reach the card, only the edges will reach the wreath. So I'm putting 1 foam square on the back of each of those. I don't have to worry about it bending in the mail because we put that strength behind our sentiments. Now I'm putting liquid adhesive, this is Gina K Connect, over everything and picking this up and placing it on my card. By using liquid adhesive, I can wiggle it until I have my positioning just right. When I'm happy, I can pull off the tape and look at that. They're all positioned nicely. If you want to save time, you could put each one at a little bit of an angle for a more playful look. I had extra sentiment strips because we created so many, so I added one on the inside of the card too, along with some additional flowers that I stamped, stenciled, and die cut using the same set. Here's a closer look at that embossing folder that we used on the background and all of the dimension we have. I did add some Trinity Stamps Crystal Ball Dewdrop Baubles, a new favorite of mine, and I put them at the center of the flowers and also scattered along the background. So with this card, it shows how to use multiple sentiment strips and to get the placement just right. All right, now let's do another card example. This one just has 1 sentiment right at the center. And I have a tip on how to do that too. This is the new Altenew Enjoy Life stamp set. There are, again, coordinating stencils and dies that are available separately or together. I just really liked the layering stencil look of this. It gives kind of a modern feel, a unique type of floral compared to others that I've used. Now, I'm not going to, again, show the whole process of the stenciling, but what I've done here is I have heat embossed the black ink with the clear embossing powder onto regular white cardstock and use the coordinating die to cut it out. And I did that with 2 die cuts. Again, these stencils are easy to figure out because engraved in the stencil is kind of a numbering system that goes with the guide, making it super easy. Now, I thought I'd do kind of a rainbow from the top to the bottom. I started with yellow at the top, and I'm working my way down to a teal at the bottom. So over the openings, instead of doing like a light color and then layering with a dark color, I'm doing a rainbow blend. So right over all of the openings of those floral pieces. Now I will do the same thing onto the other die cut. The next part of the stencil colors in some of the other petals on the flower. So I will follow again that rainbow from yellow at the top to a blue towards the bottom. This does not have to be perfect. That's one of the great things about ink blending. It'll dry nice and pretty. So I did that to both of my cards, and now I'm coming in with the second layer of the flowers, and I'm doing the same colors but darker so that I can have a little pop of layering color all along the flowers. The best part is I'm using the same ink pads. I'm just putting down a more generous application of the ink on the second layer. And then after I do this on the other die cut, I'll use basic greens to fill in the leaves, again using the stencils. When I'm done, I'll pull my mat away from the die cuts and look at these. I love that bold rainbow look. Off screen, I used the same Starburst embossing folder on white cardstock that we used earlier. I trimmed that down and put it onto a black 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding note card. And then I glued the two floral pieces together. I like how they kind of fit there in the middle. I want to add one sentiment right at the center of the card. And if I don't have it right in the center, since it's a focal point, it might look off. So I want to do the best I can. I do create templates like this also. Sometimes I show them in videos, sometimes I don't. This piece here is 5.5 inches tall. Doesn't matter how wide. I'm going to keep that laminated pink piece so I can use this again and again as a template. I also have a piece of white cardstock, a scrap, that is 5.5 inches long. I folded that in half, and that gives me the midpoint. So now I'm making 2 marks onto my template, that pink piece, and drawing a line between them. This is the midpoint on that template. Now you could use a ruler and measure where the midpoint is, but I know some people don't like to use measurements, so finding the midpoint by folding a scrap in half is really a helpful tip. Now that template over there, I can put up next to my card, and that line is the middle point. I didn't really have room to do a pencil line on my card, so I'm just using the template on the right to show that this die cut is right in the middle. I then can use a T-roller to make sure that it's straight. So these kind of tools are helpful to me. I can keep that pink template that has the line down the middle, or you can just fold a scrap in half every time. Things like this just save you time when you do your crafting. All right, so here is the completed card. I really didn't add anything else to it. I do have a couple extra pieces of scrap cardstock behind the sentiment so it stands up a bit and stays nice and doesn't get flattened. You can see I use that embossing folder on the background and then lots of bold ink color to color in those flowers. The best part is this card didn't really take that long to put together, and I can change out that sentiment for different occasions at the center and make multiples if I wanted to. All right, now let's do another example. This time I put my sentiments off to the side, and I'll share some tips for that too. And it has a completely different look. I'm using this new Altenew Climbing Leaves background stamp. This is the coolest background stamp because they also have a die available that cuts it out so you can see like the little openings. Really great for a layered background. Well, I thought I would white heat emboss it on watercolor paper. I've already done that off screen, so I just white heat emboss that stamped image on watercolor paper. Now I'm using that die to cut it out. You can't really see the white heat embossing, but I can in person. Ran that through my die cut machine, and now we have this die cut background with the heat embossing. I love that it's die cut. I think it just adds a lot to it. Now I'm going to use Lindy's Magical Powders. These are the 3 colors that I'm using. I've done a video recently talking about these powders and how much fun they are. I will link to that here at the top right and at the end of this video. Basically, all you do is sprinkle a little bit of the powders onto your cardstock. I like to use watercolor cardstock, which I used here. And then I like to use a few different colors. So I just sprinkled a tiny bit of 3 different colors in different areas on the background. I'm mostly going for green with a little pop of blue. After you sprinkle that on, you add water to it and watch. The color reacts and you see different colors pop out and lots of shimmer to these. So much fun. Now I had some red on my brush. I didn't realize that. That's why it's kind of going a little red off to the side, but that's okay. Set that aside and give it time to dry. It will look like a hot mess for now, but I promise it'll dry lovely. All right, now fast forward, I've given it time to dry, and look at this beautiful color. I wish you could see the shimmer in real life. I will now trim this background down, and it gives it a nice clean look. These Lindy's Magical Powders are great for creating dynamite backgrounds, fast to use. Again, check out that video if you want to learn more. All right, now I decided to trim this background down even more so that it would fit behind this mega stamp frame from Altenew. I really like the finished look of this. I cut it from white cardstock and I'm gluing it right on top of our background. I think giving this a little framed look adds to the card. I then glued the white centerpiece behind that so when you look through our leaves you see white. And I'm gluing this all onto a light pool card that is cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. For a focal point on the bottom right, I used the Altenew Decorative Swirls die set. There's a beautiful leaf in there, and I cut it from gold matte cardstock. And then I cut it from a scrap of cardstock too and glued that behind it to give it some stability and strength. I added that to the bottom right of our card, and now I want to put 3 sentiments on top of that. These sentiments are ones I made before, and I have 2 layers of scrap cardstock behind each, so these will be strong too. I'm putting down the middle one first and using my T-roller to make sure that it's straight. The right side of that strip I lined up with the edge of my little white die cut frame. Then I can add 1 die cut above that and 1 die cut below that. I use liquid adhesive so that I can wiggle it and get it just right and then leave it to dry. I wanted the inside to match the outside, so I used the same white die cut. So you have the postage stamp looking die cut on the front and on the inside with a spot to write your personal message in the middle. I did add a few gold baubles here and there to the front to match the gold of that metallic cardstock and the shimmer in the background. Here's a better look at that shimmer. You can see how you see some green, some orange, some blue in that background. It's fun to see the different colors that pop up with those powders. And by having 3 sentiments, it makes the card a little more special. You can change that out for any occasion. And next time you create a card and you can't find the right large sentiment, instead try using 3 sentiment strips like I did here. All right, I have one more card for you. This one uses lots of sentiment strips to create kind of a border on our card. Believe it or not, this one doesn't take long because we made a template so we could do a lot of stamping quickly. The Just Saying Hi sentiment on this one is from this new Altenew Roses stamp set. It has beautiful layering images. They're very easy to line up, and there's a guide included. And there are available dies to cut them out if you want. But what I'm using from this are these 3 bold sentiments. They match nicely with the ones I used earlier, but have 3 different sentiments. I really like the Just Saying Hi, so I'll be using that on this card. So I'm following the same process I taught you earlier, which is to put that cardstock scrap onto your sticky mat. You'll stamp your sentiment on there, then place the template around that and press it onto that sticky mat so it stays there. Now we can just pop in a cardstock strip. This one's 3/8 of an inch wide. And I'll just do this over and over again in different colors of ink. It really doesn't take long because we have that template made. Now you could change up the sentiment, so each sentiment on the bottom of your card is different, but I think it's fun to have the same one repeating in different colors. Now I'm taking a piece of scrap here. This is a scrap piece of laminated cardstock, and I'm just temporarily taping it on the bottom of my note card to use as a guide to keep my sentiments going straight at an angle along it. You can see all my sentiments that I've stamped up there. Each one does have 2 scraps of cardstock behind it, so it'll have some dimension on the card, but you could glue it down flat if you want to. And I'm just putting these together next to each other right along that straight edge that we've taped there. Now for the second row, I'll just put down some glue and keep building. And I'm kind of doing a brick kind of pattern here and just leaving a tiny bit of space between each. So this doesn't take long. Again, you just glue them together kind of like a puzzle. You can in fact do multiple cards at once if you want to. Now we'll remove our guide and then give that some time to dry. Then we can flip the card over and cut along the edge. So all that little bit of extra can be cut off and saved for another card if you want to. You'll notice the back of this card has some stamping on it that I messed up. Didn't realize that. So I'll just cut the front off and glue it onto a clean note card. Now to finish off the card, I did add an Altenew Fancy Hello die cut. I use this one a lot. I die cut it from white cardstock twice and once from silver glitter cardstock, glued those together for dimension and added it right above our border. So it's a simple design, but it's fun because you can mix and match different colors together and get creative with that. I also think it would be fun to use all the same width sentiment strip, but change up and use lots of different sentiments from different sets all together on one card. All right, I hope these tips for creating sentiment strips and how to use them on your cards is helpful. It really is a great way to use up those smaller sentiments and make them the focal point of your card. If you're interested in the products I used today, I always provide links for those below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I have a couple videos that I mentioned in this one. I appreciate you watching. I hope you have a wonderful week. We'll see you soon.